Well, good evening. I'm Alan Jackson, and welcome to Nashville. If you watch this show at all this year, you know that I'm an optimist. And I optimistically suspect that there's a bit of turmoil ahead of us as we make the transition from the Biden years to the return of Donald Trump. Well, here's why I'm optimistic. I believe God will take us through. One of the most remarkable things I've seen in recent years came in this recent election cycle across the heartland of America, the flyover country. You know, it's that place where those of us who are despicable, we live. Well, multiplied millions of people went and stood in line to vote, to raise their hand and say, we don't like the direction in which we're traveling. We want a new direction. We want a new agenda. And I believe when the people in the heartland of America stand up, that it bodes well for our future. So I'm very much optimistic about what's ahead of us beyond the political class in Washington because of the people in the heartland of America. So with that, I want to bring on our guest tonight. Standing by in Los Angeles is the editor-in-chief of the very well-regarded Breitbart.com. Alex Marlow, welcome to Nashville.
Glad to be here virtually, and we love the heartland of America at Breitbart, and we think the heartland drives this country. So thanks for all the support, and everyone in Tennessee and beyond.
Well, Alex, Washington's elite is buzzing about the leverage that Donald Trump is already showing without even having his cabinet choices signed off on by the Senate. He's got Elon and Vivek and others helping him decide how to move forward on some of the big issues. Take the budget impasse on Capitol Hill and another threat of a government shutdown. Is this just part of a transition across a deep divide between conservatives and liberals, or is there something deeper happening?
Yeah, it is a very deep divide, and the issue of debt's really fascinating here because the debt ceiling has mostly been a formality with Democrats in charge. We were always going to blow through it, but there was something about it where we were allowed from time to time to at least take inventory and take stock and realize how much we're overspending as a country. And we're seeing reports of, billions of dollars spent on a handful of electric vehicles for the post office, things like that. Huge embarrassments that are really funded by taxpayers and future generations because the debt is ballooning out of control. And now we're in a situation where the Democrats are going to use the debt to try to leverage President Trump. They want the debt ceiling to come up so that they can make demands of him if they're going to allow for it to get raised. So that's been the real discussion today on Capitol Hill, which is a fascinating thing because Trump actually wants it to be raised at such a high rate, perhaps even removed entirely, so then we don't have these periodic check-ins. So I like the check-ins. I like for all of us to have to come together and acknowledge that we're way overspending on useless stuff. But now the Democrats have got him cornered in a way because he's probably going to have to give some concessions to Chuck Schumer and the Democrats who just got summarily voted down by the voters in November. So it's a big chaotic mess, and Trump's going to have his work cut out for him.
Well, Joe Biden might not be as visible as he used to be, but he's sure spending a lot of time making last moves without regard, it seems to me, to what they mean to anyone else but him. Trump said he was going to finish building the wall because he knows, as does Biden, that the open border policy has been a disaster. So what does Biden do? He put the border wall panels up for sale to anyone who wants to buy scrap metal. So much for telling Trump to his face that he wanted to make the transition constructive. Alex, we already know that he's not a man of his word, but isn't this a thoroughly reckless way to wind down an already failed presidency?
Thoroughly reckless, and I think he's trying to sow chaos to try to sabotage Donald Trump, but what he's really doing is he's sabotaging the country. If you look at just the latest developments in the 11th hour from the Biden administration, we have this drone chaos where all these drones are flying all over the place. Clearly, the government knows what it is, and yet they won't explain it to us. We've got all these pardons and commutations, a record level. Every president does some of these, but Biden set the standard. He set the record for it. The coup in Syria that took place, where maybe that'll work out. I hope it does for Christians in particular, but it's certainly a more chaotic environment, and Biden's taking credit for that. And allowing for those long-range missiles to be shot from Ukraine into Russia, that could bring us to the brink of World War III potentially. And he's leaving the border open with these job programs for illegal aliens. This is one of these things where you almost can't believe it when you lay it all out end to end, how much Biden is doing at the 11th hour. And this border wall issue is crucial to it because Republicans wanted him to sell the parts of the wall that he wasn't using years ago so that Texas could buy it up and then they could start building some wall on their own. They wanted that. The Biden administration wouldn't allow for that. They allowed it to sit around. Who knows what condition these materials are in now. And now they're trying to sell them off on the cheap. The plan is clearly to keep our border open and to sow more chaos in this country. This should be deeply unacceptable, and all of it should be looked into instantly once Trump gets in January.
You mentioned Syria. The rebel forces there have finally forced Bashar al-Assad from power. He flew off to Russia. Biden's trying to take some credit for the ouster of Assad. But what we may not have considered is that just like the mess he created in Afghanistan, he's now going to own what happens in Syria. So do you agree that if there's any genocide of Syrian Christians, that's on him?
This is exactly the right point to make. And that's why I was almost confused why he would take credit, because it feels like he's spiking the football on the 5-yard line. No one likes Assad. He's a bad guy. He probably gassed his own people. I'm not defending Assad, but I'm saying that these guys are a terror affiliates who are taking over the country. And if those people go and have a genocide against Christians, Joe Biden owns that. Joe Biden fancies himself a foreign policy expert. I wrote a book about Joe Biden. I spent a lot of time researching him. And he honestly thinks of himself as an incredible diplomat with deep skills when it comes to foreign policy and national security. Clearly, I'm sure most of your audience, certainly all of my audience, doesn't agree with that. But that's how he thinks of himself. He's now put himself in a position where there could be a genocide and it could be part of his legacy, which is just frankly stunning and seems stupid almost.
Well, the next one is equally hard to believe, but some Democrats are putting out the word that they'd back another White House run for Kamala Harris. Polling shows her a leading candidate, but I would think that polling means nothing right now. There's also word that President Obama's old friend Rahm Emanuel is taking up the cause for anyone but Kamala Harris. What are you hearing?
Yeah, it seems pretty clear to me that Kamala Harris is by far the front runner for 2028. There's been 3 major polls that have come out since the November election, and she's winning by at least 35% in every single poll. She's polling in the high 30s or low 40s, which is monster numbers compared to any of her rivals. Everyone else is polling in single digits. So it shows you how far ahead she is. This is a disaster for the Democrats because she was a terrible candidate. They would like to have us believe that she didn't win against Donald Trump because there wasn't enough time to introduce her to the public. I don't think that's the case. I think that we just don't like her. She had no vision. The cackling was very strange to us, announcing that she is full of joy, but then if you support the other guy, you're Hitler. None of that worked. She showed no major issues to run on other than that she wasn't Donald Trump. We're not all obsessed with abortions in this country. So she did a terrible, terrible job as a candidate, way worse than Joe Biden did, and she's way ahead in 2028. This is a huge buzzsaw for smart Democrats. They know this. So what they're trying to do is encourage her to go back to California and become the governor and run in 2026. That would make it very unlikely she would win in 2026 and then start running for president. This would be terrible for me and my family, but it would also be good, but it'd be good for Democrats. Thus, it'd be bad for Republicans. And even though I'm a journalist and my time is spent gathering the news, curating the news, reporting the news, I have an interest in seeing conservatives win. I want her to be the nominee. Again, I think she's a terrible candidate. I think we would luck out, and especially if it's a long race, a race that goes on for a year and a half, 2 years, she doesn't have anything to say. She will completely exhaust the American public, and a Republican will win again in 2028. So I'm not surprised there by Emanuel.
We'd all get healthier if we had 18 months of a word salad to survive on. Let's take a short break. I'll be back with more from Breitbart's editor-in-chief in just a moment. Well, I'm back now with the editor-in-chief of Breitbart, Alex Marlow. You wrote a very successful book about the media called Breaking the News, in which you detailed the tricks that the media uses to spin every detail to fit its agenda. Well, now the mainstream media is busy trying to figure out how to cover Donald Trump and to keep their media businesses in the black without just criticizing every move he makes. Do you think that some of them may find their way to a place that we could trust?
It's a great question, and it's something that maybe I'll need to do a follow-up at some point, because the media is in a total bind right now, because they've catered to an audience of hysterical people who bought into the Russian collusion hoax and all sorts of hoaxes that we've documented Breitbart News day to day, and I lay out many of them in the book. But their audience is dwindling, so they've got to try to find new people. The core audience wants to see the hysteria continue. They want to see Trump as a bad orange man. He's ruining the country. He's a closet Nazi. Those are the people who are remaining at these networks in their viewership. But there's no growth there for them because so many people are burned out on that. So how do they try to get normal people to tune back into the news? They're not going to be able to do it because you can't have a news environment where you're catering to the squad, the people on the left, and also normal people. There is no way to marry that. They're not clever enough to do it. And yet somehow they're going to have to try. So I can't wait to see them try to do it. But their whole business model got blown up in November of this year when the American public stood up and voted for Donald Trump and Republicans.
Well, Disney just settled a case with Trump over a comment one of their anchors said, and they paid $16 million to keep it out of court. Trump says he's going to sue others, including the Des Moines Register, over their polling that was very far off, close to Election Day. Do you think more of them will be more careful in dressing up their reporting? Anything on Trump usually gets a lot of clicks. So do you think they may have been torn between their goals?
Who knows? Yeah, you'd think they would be more careful, but some of the media reaction was saying it's time to dig in, it's time to stand our ground. This was coming from CNN's Jim Acosta and Brian Stelter. They were saying that it's time to be defiant. George Stephanopoulos wanted to be defiant, but he claimed Donald Trump was a rapist, which he's not. You're not allowed to do that. That was the time to say, I'm sorry, we messed that one up. I shouldn't have called President Trump a rapist. Instead, they said they wanted to stand their ground. How do you stand your ground with lies and smears? Of course, that should be illegal. You can't just call someone that. And yet that behavior, I think, is likely to continue given the current media climate, because that's what the audience wants. They like that red meat, and it is going to lead to a lot more lawsuits. Frankly, I hope that Donald Trump does sue people like Ann Seltzer, who is the Iowa pollster. She said that Harris was winning by 3 points. Harris ended up losing that state by 13 or 14 points. Seltzer's a smart woman. I'm sure that she had known that this poll was bogus. She put it out everywhere, and every single news outlet in the country started to lead their news hours with that poll, suggesting Harris was going to win. This was designed to create momentum, and I believe it was election interference. I believe it was an insurrection, if you will, by Ann Seltzer. So, of course, Trump should threaten to sue at a minimum to at least try to chill people out on some of these clear media manipulations of the public.
You know, I was taught that a reflection of good character is when you make a mistake, you acknowledge it. And we talk about the media. They've gotten so many things wrong, from Russian collusion to impeachment inquiries. I mean, all the things we've heard. You know, when Trump said he was being spied on from the FBI, the media laughed at him. And yet he was right on the overwhelming majority of those things. Are we ever going to hear any retraction or correction come from the media, or will they just continue with a whole new batch of lies?
Pastor, that's a terrific point, and it's one that I have been obsessed with over the years. Is there one person who's ever stood up and said, my bad, I got that one wrong? I mean, did you see anyone? CNN put out this hoax last week where they had freed this prisoner, but the prisoner was actually one of Assad's torturers. And then did anyone come out and say, my bad, I'm sorry, I got that one wrong? Did Jake Tapper, did anyone go out and do that? I don't think so. And certainly no heads rolled. No one got fired for these things. So they can't do it because truth is not a left-wing value. It is for us in the Judeo-Christian conservative audience. We believe in truth. If we get one wrong like that, we want to make a correction. We want to set the record straight. They don't feel that way. It's bizarre to us, but it is the truth.
Well, one more current story that I'd like to get your opinion on. The surge of drones, or at least the lights in the sky that look like drones. The Pentagon says they're not flying drones, but it could well be a different agency in Washington. Is there any way to cover it and find someone who actually knows what's going on?
Yeah, of course the government knows what's going on, and they won't explain it to us. And this is why I made that point about the chaos Biden's sowing. I don't understand why they wouldn't just calm our nerves and just say, this is X, Y, or Z. We don't know what it is. Maybe it's the Chinese surveillance. Maybe it's Iran, as it was initially discussed. Maybe it's a bunch of hobbyists. Maybe it's a bunch of people doing test runs for delivery drones. We don't know, but they said it's not the military and it's not the three-letter agencies. We don't know. Why won't they tell us? That's the bigger question to me than even what the drones are. Why is the government being so secretive?
Well, Alex Marlow, thank you for your time today. We'll have you back after the new year.
Pastor, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. In a moment, I'll have a little bit of guidance to help you think through all this change as we move forward together. Stay right where you are. You know, it's Christmas time and we're busy finishing our shopping list, thinking about our plans for the holiday, probably eating too much dessert. It's part of the season. The big picture of Christmas is about the incarnation, God stepping into time. It's a legitimate holiday. It's a reason for joy and celebration and family. But if we think about the characters in that initial Christmas drama, God stepping into time was very disruptive. We're in a season where we need God to step back into our world. We need His help to help restore some order, to bring some values back for our children and our grandchildren, to protect their liberties and freedoms. We're going to have to be willing to walk through some disruption of our own. When that angel rolled in and said to Mary, I've got good news of great joy for you. You're going to have a child. It was a very disruptive message to Mary. She's engaged. The child she's going to conceive and give birth to is not Joseph's son. That's a very awkward conversation she has to have with Joe. Awkward enough that the angel has to go see Joseph to help him manage his side of that equation. Every character we see gathered in that nativity scene that we're so familiar with understood the disruption that comes when God is moving in the earth. So I want to make a suggestion. In fact, I want to put an invitation before you. Are we willing for God to be disruptive in our lives? I know we want our holiday to be just perfect. We want everybody to behave and all of our favorite dishes to turn out just right and the right presents for the right people. But in the midst of that, are we willing to allow God to write a future that brings change to us? If we'll raise our hand and say, I want to know you better, I want to follow you more completely, I want to yield to you with more humility, then I think we can have a future that's directed by Almighty God Himself. And that's better than if I'm in charge or you're in charge. That's a reason to have a very Merry Christmas, and it's a reason for hope more than despair. Well, I'll be back in just a moment with your emails. Thank you for taking the time to share your emails with us. Your thoughts and questions are an important part of the program. Cheryl from Missouri says, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the shadow government that Obama plans to put in place once Donald Trump takes office. I've heard he's putting this together so he can take over. Well, Cheryl, I do my best to avoid conspiracy theories. There seems to be no end to that dark hole that they lead us down. But I am very much a fan of observable realities. And one of the things that we know just from watching what's been happening for these last 3 years is we had a president that was elected who wasn't really capable of even carrying on polite speech. He certainly couldn't make a presentation in a coherent way. He had trouble with the most basic interactions. So it's difficult to imagine that he was the one processing the complexities that are necessary to lead our government. And then we've just finished an election cycle where the candidate for the Democratic Party didn't receive a single vote. We didn't vote for that candidate. They were appointed by someone. We don't know who that someone was. We don't know when that process took place. We just knew Kamala Harris was pushed out in front of us and said, you should vote for her. So I can't speak to a shadow government. I can tell you that the people that have been occupying the White House and providing leadership from the executive branch haven't been capable of carrying on polite conversation or solving complex problems. So whoever's been leading, their faces have not been front and center. I'm grateful for a new administration coming to Washington and voices that are more transparent. They've already held a press conference. That's more than we've had in a long time. Judy B. from California says, is there a subtle type of reference to the UN or something similar in Bible prophecy? It may have begun with good intentions. It's far from that now. Well, Judy, I would agree. The United Nations is not at a high point in their contributions to global civilization. There are a lot of references in Scripture to the nations of the world, how they'll gather together, take a stand against the purposes of God. Anytime we see an organization of human beings that don't embrace a biblical worldview, we should expect them to oppose the purposes of God. The UN does that rather frequently. It's a good point of prayer. We shouldn't trust them to secure our future. Well, make sure you send your emails to comments@alanjacksonnow.com. And from all of us here in Nashville, thank you for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful evening.